Okay, devotees, welcome to day 56 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4. Right, and we're in chapter 23, which is titled Maharaj Prithu's Going Back Home. First of all, our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastutyadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So, verse 11, by regularly discharging devotional service, Prithu Maharaj became transcendental in mind and could therefore constantly think of the lotus feet of the Lord. Because of this, he became completely detached and attained perfect knowledge by which he could transcend all doubt. Thus he was freed from the clutches of false ego and the material conception of life. Prabhupada begins the purport by explaining that in Narada Pancharatra devotional service is likened to a queen, and a queen with maid servants. Yeah. So the maid servants of devotional service are material opulence, liberation, mystical powers. Of course, the karmis are attached to material enjoyment. The jnanis want to become free from maya. Yogis want the 8 mystical perfections. But Narada Pancharatra says that if you come to pure devotional service, you also attain these things. Because devotional service is likened to a queen who has maidservants. So Srila Bilvamangal Thakur prayed in Krishna Karnamrita, my dear Lord, if I have unflinching devotion to you, you become manifest before me personally, and the results of fruitive activity and empiric philosophical speculation, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, become like personal attendants and remain standing before me as if awaiting my order. Right. So the idea here then is that the jnanis, by culture of Brahma Vidya, they struggle hard to get out of the clutches of maya, material nature. But the devotee, by his advancement in devotional service, automatically becomes detached from the material body, from material nature. And when a devotee's spiritual body begins to manifest, he enters into his activities in transcendental life. My gosh. Second paragraph. So, of course, now we have material body, mind, intelligence. But when we become free of these conditions, from the material conditions, our spiritual body, mind, and intelligence manifest. And in that transcendental state, the devotee gets all the benefits of karma, jnana, and yoga. And even although he never does fruitive activities, or does any speculation to get mystical powers, he automatically gets those mystical powers in his service. The devotee doesn't want any type of material opulence, but it comes automatically without endeavor. And because of his devotional service, he automatically becomes Brahmabhuta. We saw this before in verse 1426, which we just read, was it yesterday or the day before, something like that. So, on to paragraph 3 in the purport. Because of the devotee's regular devotional service, the devotee comes to the transcendental stage in all respects, and his mind cannot think of anything except the lotus feet of the Lord. This is the meaning of the word samsmarana anupurtya. By the devotees, constant thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord, the devotee becomes situated in Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. Yes, beyond the three qualities of material nature, even beyond the mode of goodness. So Prabhupada explains that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the following example. If one has strong digestive power, after eating he automatically lights a fire within his stomach to digest everything, and does not need to take medicine to aid his digestion. Similarly, the fire of devotional service is so strong that a devotee doesn't need to act separately to attain perfect knowledge or detachment from material attractions. So a jnani may possibly, may become detached by prolonged discussions about jnana, knowledge, and finally come to some sort of Brahmabhuta stage. But the devotee doesn't have to do that. By virtue just of his devotional service, the devotee attains the Brahmabhuta stage without doubt. And so the yogis and jnanis, they're always doubtful about their constitutional position. They don't really know what it is. So therefore they mistakenly think of becoming one with the Supreme. But a devotee's relationship with the Supreme becomes manifest beyond all doubt. Immediately understands his position as eternal servant of the Lord. So jnanis and yogis may think they're liberated, but actually their intelligence is not as pure as that of the devotee. So in other words, jnanis and yogis, they can become liberated. They cannot become factually liberated unless they become devotees. That's all. Yeah. So Srimad Bhagavatam verse, very important verse, kind of fundamental verse in this sense, on the subject, 10th Canto, chapter 2, verse 32 is quoted, Arura kritrena param padam tata, patanchado nadrita yushmad angrayaha. Yes, it's the two last verses of that, last lines of that verse. And it means, Prabhupada explains, the jnanis and yogis may rise to the highest perfection, Brahman realization, but because of their lack of devotion unto the lotus feet of the Lord, they fall down again into material nature. So Prabhupada explains that jnana and yoga should not be, cannot be accepted as the real processes for liberation. Of course, those practitioners think they are, but they cannot be accepted as such. But rather, by doing devotional service, Prithu Maharaj automatically transcended all these positions, jnana, yoga, etc. And of course, since Prithu Maharaj was a Shaktivesh avatar, he didn't need to do anything to attain liberation. He just came from Vaikuntha to execute the Lord's will here. So now he's going to go back without having to do jnana, yoga, or karma. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, although Prithu Maharaj was eternally a pure devotee of the Lord, he nonetheless adopted the process of devotional service in order to teach the people in general the proper process for executing the duties of life and ultimately returning home back to Godhead. Verse 12. When he became completely free from the conception of bodily life, Maharaj Prithu realized Lord Krishna sitting in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Being thus able to get all instructions from him, from the Lord, he gave up all other processes of yoga and jnana. He was not even interested in the perfection of the yoga and jnana systems, for he thoroughly realized that devotional service to Krishna is the ultimate goal of life, and that unless the yogis and jnanis become attracted to Krishna Katha, narrations about Krishna, their illusions concerning existence can never be dispelled. Okay, so first paragraph of the purport. As long as someone's too absorbed in bodily consciousness, he becomes interested in different processes of self-realization. When he's too absorbed in bodily consciousness. Yeah, different processes like mystic yoga, like mental speculation. But when you understand the goal is to approach Krishna, then he realizes Krishna in everyone's heart. Thus, and therefore, helps everyone who's interested in Krishna consciousness. So the perfection of life depends on one's inclination to hear about Krishna. Therefore, it's said here, Yavad gadagraja katasu ratim na koryat. Unless you become interested in Krishna, his pastimes and activities, there's no question of liberation by means of yoga practice or speculative knowledge. Yes. Wow, that's amazing. That's wonderful, isn't it? Just so clear. Right, so we got a second paragraph here. That assuming we've come, well, Prithu Maharaj, having come to the stage of devotion, of course, became uninterested in jnana and yoga, and he just gave them up. Just like that. That is the stage of pure devotional service, as described by Rupa Goswami and Yabilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karma Janavritam, Anukulyena Krishnanu Shilanam, Bhakti Uttama. So Prabhupada goes on to explain that real jnana means understanding the living entity is the eternal servant of the Lord. This oftentimes is attained after many births, as Bhagavad Gita 7:19 says. Prabhupada quotes, Bahunam Jamanam Ante, Ganavan mam prapadyate, bahunam janmanam, ante, after many births and deaths. So anyway, in the Paramahansa stage, one fully realizes that Krishna's everything, and that Krishna consciousness is the highest perfection of life. And this is how he becomes a Paramahansa. And such a Mahatma or Paramahansa is rare. And Paramahansa, of course, is never attracted by Hatha Yoga speculation, simply interested in unalloyed devotional service. So sometimes someone who previously was addicted to these other processes tries to do devotional service and jnana and yoga at the same time. But as soon as he comes to pure devotional service, he's able to give them up, the others, jnana yoga. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in other words, when one firmly realizes Krishna as the supreme goal, he's no longer attracted by mystic yoga practice or the speculative empirical methods of knowledge. Very good. Okay, so now we come to the second section. From verse 13 to verse 24, he gives up his body. Means Prithu Maharaj gives up his body. So let us read the verses. Verse 13, in due course of time, when Prithu Maharaj was to give up his body, he fixed his mind firmly upon the lotus feet of Krishna, and thus, completely situated on the Brahmabhuta platform, he gave up the material body. 14. When Maharaj Prithu practiced a particular yogic sitting posture, he blocked the doors of his anus with his ankles, pressed his right and left calves, and gradually raised his life ear upward, raising it onto the circle of his navel, up to his heart and throat, and finally pushed it upward to the central position between his two eyebrows. Verse 15. In this way, Prithu Maharaj gradually raised his ear of life up to the hole in his skull, whereupon he lost all desire for material existence. Gradually he merged his ear of life with the totality of air, his body with the totality of earth, and the fire within his body with the totality of fire. 16. In this way, according to the different positions of the various parts of the body, Prithu Maharaj merged the holes of his senses with the sky, his bodily liquids such as blood and various secretions with the totality of water. And he merged earth with water, then water with fire, fire with air, air with sky, and so on. Verse 17. He amalgamated the mind with the senses and the senses with the sense objects according to their respective positions. And he also amalgamated the material ego with the total material energy, Mahatattva. 18. Prithu Maharaj then offered the total designation of the living entity into the supreme controller of illusory energy, being released from all the designations by which the living entity became entrapped. He became free by knowledge and renunciation, and by the spiritual force of his devotional service. In this way, being situated in his original constitutional position of Krishna consciousness, he gave up this body as a Prabhu, or controller of the senses. 19. The queen, the wife of Prithu Maharaj, whose name was Archi, followed her husband into the forest, Since she was a queen, her body was very delicate. Although she did not deserve to live in the forest, she voluntarily touched her lotus feet to the ground. Verse 20. Although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archie followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers, and leaves. And because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she did not feel any difficulties. 21. When Queen Archie saw that her husband, who had been so merciful to her and the earth, no longer showed symptoms of life, she lamented for a little while, and then built a fiery pyre on top of a hill, and placed the body of her husband on it. After this, the queen executed the necessary funerary functions and offered oblations of water. After bathing in the river, she offered obeisances to various demigods situated in the sky in the different planetary systems. She then circumambulated the fire, and while thinking of the lotus feet of her husband, entered its flames. 23. After observing this brave act performed by the chaste wife Archie, the wife of the great King Prithu, many thousands of the wives of the demigods, along with their husbands, offered prayers to the queen, for they were very much satisfied. 24. At that time, the demigods were situated on top of Mandra Hill, and all their wives began to shower flowers on the funeral pyre, and began to talk amongst themselves as follows. So what did they say as follows? When we get to the next section, we'll go through all of that, don't worry. Okay, so now we go back to verse 13, and we will go through the section again, verses and purports. Verse 13. In due course of time, when Prithu Maharaj was to give up his body, he fixed his mind firmly upon the lotus feet of Krishna, and thus, completely situated on the Brahmabhuta platform, he gave up the material body. Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, according to a Bengali proverb, whatever spiritual progress one makes in life will be tested at the time of death. Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 verse 6 confirms yam yam vapi smaram bhavam, etc. Famous verse. Whatever state of mind you remember at the time of death, to that you'll attain without fail. So devotees practicing Krishna consciousness know that the exam will come at the time of death. Yeah. And if you can remember Krishna at death, you're immediately transferred to Goloka Vrindavan. Your life's successful. So Prithu understood the end of his life was near. So he became very happy and proceeded to give up his body on the Brahmabhuta stage by practicing the yogic process. So, anyway, yeah, it's thoroughly described in the following verses, how one can voluntarily give up the body and return back to Godhead. So the yoga process of Prithu Maharaj at the time of death, the way he practiced it, accelerates the giving up of the body while you're still in good health physically and mentally. And Prabhupada says every devotee would like to give up the body in that condition. And this is expressed particularly by King Kulashekar in the Mukundamala Stotra. Prabhupada quotes the verse there. Krishna Tvadiya Pada Pankaja Panjarantam, etc. And Prabhupada gives a paraphrasing of the translation that King Kulashekar wanted to give up his body while in a healthy state. Thus he prayed to Krishna to let him die immediately while he was in good health, while his mind was sound. Because otherwise, when a man dies, he's generally overpowered by mucus and bile, and then he chokes, and it's very horrible. Since it's very difficult to vibrate any sound while choking, it's simply Krishna's grace that if one can chant Hare Krishna at the time of death. However, as Prita Maharaj did, if you situate yourself in the Mukt Asan, the sitting place for liberation, the yogi can immediately give up the body and go wherever he likes. Perfect yogi can give up his body whenever he wants through the practice of yoga. Verse 14. When Maharaj Prithu practiced a particular yogic sitting posture, he blocked the doors of his anus with his ankles, pressed his right and left calves, and gradually raised his life ear upward, passing it on to the circle of his navel, up to his heart and throat, and he finally pushed it upward to the central position between his two eyebrows. This is the Muktasan we mentioned a minute ago or so. So the thing is, in the process of yoga, after you've followed strict regulative principles, controlling your eating, sleeping, mating, then you can go on to practice the sitting postures. And the ultimate aim of all of this is that you can live in the body as long as you like, or if you're not perfect, leave the body to go anywhere within or outside of the universe, and give up the body whenever you like. So some yogis give up their bodies so they can go to higher planetary systems to enjoy material life there. But the intelligent yogis don't waste their time with that. They just go back to Godhead. So it seems, second paragraph, that Prithu Maharaj, he wasn't bothered with higher planets, just wanted to go back to Godhead. So he had done mystic yoga, then he stopped it when he became fully Krishna conscious. So now he's taking advantage of previous practice and in this way accelerating his return back to Godhead by, in this case, using the Mukt Asan, the sitting posture for liberation, to attain, Prabhupada says, to attain success in the Kundalini chakra. Wow. Then gradually lifting the life from the Muladhara chakra to the Swadhisthana chakra, then the Manipur chakra, the Anahita chakra, the Vishuddha chakra, finally to the Agya chakra. This Agya chakra is between the eyebrows, and then when he's reached that point, he can penetrate the Brahmarandra in the skull, right, the crown of the head, and go to any planet he wants up to Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka. anyway, of course, the conclusion is one has to come to the Brahma Bhuta stage in order to go back to Godhead. But those who are in Krishna consciousness, they practice Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam to go back to Godhead without getting into this mukta asana and the other, this, that, and the other, what's just been described. And Prabhupada does make the point that the purpose of the mukta asana practice is to come to the Brahma Bhuta stage. Because without doing that, you can't go to the spiritual world. So Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 14:26, and the point there, which is explained in the third paragraph, is that the bhakti yogi is always on that stage, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. And as long as he continues there, he goes to the spiritual sky automatically after the death of the body, back to Godhead. So the devotee doesn't have to worry about practicing or not practicing Kundalini chakra, or not penetrating the 6 chakras as described above. Prithu Maharaj had already practiced it. And he didn't want to wait till death came naturally, so he just took advantage of it all to give up his body on the spot and immediately went back to Godhead. Verse 15. In this way, Prithu Maharaj gradually raised his life air up to the hole in his skull, whereupon he lost all desire for material existence. Gradually he merged his air of life with the totality of air, his body with the totality of earth, and the fire within his body with the totality of fire. So the thing is, in the purport here, Prabhupada explains, when the spirit soul, 1/10,000th size of the tip of a hair, is forced into material existence, then he's covered with the gross and subtle bodies. And when you attain liberation, you're freed from them. Yeah. And Buddha's teachings of nirvana, they're based on this principle, more or less. He told his followers, give up material coverings by meditation and yoga, but he didn't give any information of the soul, because he's shunyavadi. He doesn't think there is such a thing. But anyway, if you follow his instructions strictly, you can become free from the coverings and attain what he calls nirvana. And second paragraph, when you give up the coverings, you're just there as spirit soul. But unfortunately, people, 99.9% of the people, don't have information of the spiritual world or the spirit soul. So therefore, there's 99.9% chance of them falling down again to material life. There's small chance of going to Vaikuntha from the Brahmajyoti. Yeah. So the impersonalists think the Brahmajyoti is it's all one, no variety. Buddhists think it's void, shunya, zero. In either case, if it's without variety or if it's zero, there's none of the spiritual bliss enjoyed in Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in the absence of varieties of enjoyment, the spirit soul gradually feels an attraction to enjoy a life of bliss. And not having any information of Krishna Loka or Vaikuntha Loka, he naturally falls down to material activities in order to enjoy material varieties. 16. In this way, according to the different positions of the various parts of the body, Prithu Maharaj merged the holes of his senses with the sky. his bodily liquids such as blood and various secretions with the totality of water, and he merged earth with water, then water with fire, fire with air, air with sky, and so on. Okay. Prabhupada says that in the first paragraph there are two important words. Yathastanam, that's one word, and Vibhagasha. Let's just have a look for their technical meanings. Yathastanam, according to the proper situation, and Vibhagasha, as they are divided. Yes, okay. So in Bhagavatam 2nd Canto, 5th chapter, Brahma has explained how the creation took place, that we've already been through in great detail. Step by step he explained proper divisions, senses, controller of senses, objects of senses, material elements, how they're created one after another, air from sky, fire from air, water from fire, earth from water, etc. So it's very important to thoroughly know the process of creation in the cosmic manifestation. And this body, our bodies, are also created by the same process by the Lord. Yeah. The Lord, after entering the universe, creates the cosmic manifestations, one after the other. And similarly, the living entity, after entering the womb of the mother, collects gross and subtle bodies, taking ingredients from the totalities of the elements. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the words Yathastanam Vibhagasha indicate that one should know the process of creation and should meditate upon the creative process inversely and thus become free from material contamination. Verse 17. He amalgamated the mind with the senses, and the senses with the sense objects, according to their respective positions. And he also amalgamated the material ego with the total material energy, the Mahatattva. So, here we have there's a purport. I must admit it's a little complicated. So Prabhupada says, referring to the ego, or in respect to the ego, the total material energy is sundered or broken into two parts. One is agitated by the mode of ignorance, the other agitated by the modes of passion and goodness. By agitation of ignorance, the five gross elements are created, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. By passion, mind is created. By goodness, false ego, means identification with matter, is created. And the mind is protected. The mind. Prabhupada doesn't get into it, but Prabhupada says the mind is protected by a particular type of demigod. And Prabhupada goes on, this is all very interesting and a bit sort of esoteric. Sometimes the mind is understood to have a controlling deity or demigod. Yeah. In this way, the total mind, the material mind controlled by the material demigods, was amalgamated with the senses. The senses were then amalgamated with the sense objects, forms, tastes, smells, sounds, etc. Sound is the ultimate source of the sense objects. The mind was attracted by the senses. Senses were attracted by sense objects. They all amalgamated in the sky. And the creation is arranged in such a way that cause and effect follow one after the other. So the merging involves the amalgamating of the effect with the original cause. And since the ultimate cause, the original cause, ultimate cause in the material world is Mahatattva, everything was gradually wound up and amalgamated with Mahatattva. So Prabhupada makes an interesting point at the end of the paragraph. This may be compared to Shunyavad or voidism, but it is the process of cleansing the real spiritual mind or consciousness. Second paragraph. I mean, this is a bit, you have to think about this, devotees. When the mind was completely washed or is completely washed of material contamination, pure consciousness acts. Then the sound vibration from the spiritual sky can automatically cleanse all material contaminations, as Lord Chaitanya said, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. So all we need to do is take advice from Lord Chaitanya, chant Hare Krishna to cleanse the mind of all material contamination. There you go. Prabhupada says, this is the summary of this difficult verse. As soon as the whole material contaminations washed away by the chanting, all material desires and reactions are vanquished, and real peaceful life begins. So anyway, in Kali Yuga, it's very difficult to adopt the yoga process described in these verses, unless you're some sort of big expert, but devotees, we are not, including me and you. So best thing, adopt Lord Chaitanya's process, Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, just chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, just as life in this material world has its beginning in material sound, similarly a spiritual life has its beginning in this spiritual sound vibration. 18. Prithu Maharaj then offered the total designation of the living entity into the supreme controller of illusory energy. Being released from all the designations by which the living entity became entrapped, he became free by knowledge and renunciation, and by the spiritual force of his devotional service. In this way, being situated in his original constitutional position of Krishna consciousness, he gave up this body as a Prabhu, or controller of the senses. Okay, let's have a look at the purport. So the Lord, of course, the Lord is the source of the material energy. So sometimes he's called Maya, the supreme person who can create his own pastimes through his material potency. Yeah, but the thing is, he can do that, the Lord. That's okay for him. But the jiva, that's us. We become entrapped by the material energy, by his will. And Lord Krishna mentions this in Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, verse 61. Famous verse, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hridesh Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yancharudrani Mayaya. Prabhupada paraphrases a translation, Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is situated within the heart of all conditioned souls, and by his supreme will, the living entity or individual soul gets the facility to lord it over material nature in various types of bodies, which are known as yantra, or the moving vehicle offered by the total material energy, Maya. So then, after that, second paragraph, Prabhupada continues, although we and the Lord are within the material energy, when the Lord's here, he's moving around in the world, and Supersoul is within our hearts, and so on. So, but the Lord is directing our movements by giving us different bodies through material energy. So, therefore, we're wandering in different bodies, getting implicated in different situations, getting different fruit of reactions. So, a third paragraph, when Prithu Maharaj became spiritually powerful by knowledge and renunciation, he became a Prabhu, a master of the senses, a Swami or a Goswami. Means he is no longer controlled by the influence of material energy. One is called Prabhu, Prabhupada says, when he's strong enough to give up the influence of material energy. So anyway, in this verse, the word Swarupasta is significant. The real identity of the soul lies in understanding knowledge, the knowledge that he is the eternal servant of Krishna. And this understanding is called Swarupo Palabdi. Swarupo Palabdi. So by culturing devotional service, the devotee comes to understand his relationship with the Lord. What rasa, friend, parent, lover. This is called Swarupasta. Prithu Maharaj realized his Swarup completely, and then we'll read how he left this world on a chariot, which had come from Vaikuntha. Then there's a fourth paragraph, and devotees, would you believe there's a fifth paragraph? So Prabhupada makes the point that in this verse, the word Prabhu is significant. Yeah, and actually Prabhupada, we already discussed this just now. So when you're completely self-realized and you act like that, you can be called Prabhu. Spiritual masters addressed as Prabhupada. Pada means position. So Prabhupada means he's given the position of Prabhu, or ultimately the Supreme Lord, because he acts on behalf of the Lord. And unless you're a Prabhu or control of the senses, you can't act as spiritual master, who is authorized by the Supreme Prabhu, who's Krishna. And Prabhupada mentions 7th verse of Gauravastakam, first 2 lines, Sakshadhari Tvenasamasta Shastra, Uktastata Bhavyata Eva Sadbi. Spiritual master is honored as much as the Supreme Lord, because he's the most confidential servant of the Lord. And then the 5th verse, so therefore Prithu Maharaj can also be called Prabhupada or Prabhu. So why, then there's a question. Since he's a Shakti-Vaisha avatar, why did he have to execute religious principles to become a Prabhu? Yeah. So the answer is that he had to set the example for the people, because he's acting as a king. He showed them how to live in devotional service. So similarly, Lord Chaitanya, he's not a king, but he is Krishna. He told us how to live as devotees. So that's the situation. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as it's said in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.10.6, Hitvanyata Rupam Swarupena Vyavasati. When a living entity abandons the activities of Maya and attains the position from which he can execute devotional service, his state is called Swarupsta, or complete liberation. Okay, so on we go to verse 19. The queen, the wife of Prithu Maharaj, whose name was Archi, followed her husband into the forest. Since she was a queen, her body was very delicate. Although she did not deserve to live in the forest, she voluntarily touched her lotus feet to the ground. An interesting purport here, because Archi, Prithu's wife and the queen, was the daughter of a king, she never walked on the ground, because queens never came out of the palace. And they definitely never went to the forests or tolerated living in the wilderness. And in Vedic civilization, there's so many examples of queens renouncing like this when their husbands take vanaprastha and leave the palace, with a view to passing away in due course. So Sita followed Ram to the forest. Ram was ordered to do that, not Sita, but she still voluntarily accepted the path of a husband. And similarly with Gandhari, we read actually in the first canto, the wife of Dhritarashtra, she followed him to the forest. So these are ideal chaste women. So such queens also instructed people by showing how a chaste wife acts, following the husband in every stage of life. So when the husband's king, she sits with him. When he goes to the forest, she goes too, despite having to tolerate all the difficulties of living in the forest. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore it is said here, atad arta, that although she did not want to touch her feet to the ground, she nonetheless accepted all difficulties when she went to the forest with her husband. Verse 20, although she was not accustomed to such difficulties, Queen Archi followed her husband in the regulative principles of living in the forest like great sages. She lay down on the ground and ate only fruits, flowers, and leaves. And because she was not fit for these activities, she became frail and thin. Yet because of the pleasure she derived in serving her husband, she didn't feel any difficulties. So Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, the words Bhartur Vrata Dharma Nishtaya indicate that a woman's duty or religious principle is to serve her husband in all conditions. In Vedic civilization, a man is taught how to be a brahmachari, then grihastha, then vanaprastha, then sannyasi. Wife is taught just to follow the husband strictly in all situations. After brahmacharya, a man accepts household life, and the woman is taught by the parents to be a chaste wife. So when they're united, they're both trained for life, dedicated to higher purpose. Yes, and so for the wife, she pleases him in all respects, and when he retires, she goes to the forest with him for vanaprastha. And there in the forest, she takes care of him, just as she did in household life. But when he takes sannyas, she comes home and stays with her children, setting an example for them and for the daughters-in-law. Okay, second paragraph. When Lord Chaitanya took sannyas, his wife Vishnupriya, although only 16, took a vow of austerity. She chanted on her beads, and after one round, collected a grain of rice. So as many rounds she chanted, as many grains of rice she took, She cooked and then took prasad. This is called austerity. Even today in India, Prabhupada says widows or wives of sannyasis follow principles of austerity even though they live with their children. So Archie was determined to execute her duty as wife, and while her husband was in the forest, she followed him in eating just fruits and leaves lying on the ground. But since a woman's body is more delicate than a man's, she became frail and thin. Parikarshita. When you engage in austerities, your body becomes thin. So Prabhupada makes the point, becoming fat is not a good qualification in spiritual life. Because in spiritual life, you have to reduce the comforts of eating, sleeping, mating, etc. to a minimum. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, although Queen Archie became very thin from living in the forest, according to the regulative principles, she was not unhappy, for she was enjoying the honor of serving her great husband. Verse 21, that when Queen Archie saw that her husband, who had been so merciful to her in the earth, no longer showed symptoms of life, she lamented for a little while, then built a fiery pyre on top of a hill and placed the body of her husband on it. She knew, Prabhupada explains, she knew he wasn't just death, but it was that the body, as Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse 13 says, the embodied soul goes on into another body at the time of the death of the physical body. So it's just, he just was transferred. She knew that. Yes. You know, she could have been or should have been, Prabhupada says, should have been afraid of being alone in the forest with the body of her husband. But as the wife of a great person, she lamented a little, but then she understood what to do. She got the funeral together. And second paragraph, Prithu is described here as Dayata, merciful. Not only was he the king of the earth, but he treated the earth as his child. And he protected his wife also. He treated the earth as his protected child. It's the duty of the king to protect everyone, especially the earth or the land that he rules, and the citizens and family members. So Prithu, since he was a perfect king, he protected everyone. So he's described as Dayita. Verse 22, after this, the queen executed the necessary funerary functions, offered oblations of water. After bathing in the river, she offered obeisances to various demigods situated in the sky, in the different planetary systems. She then circumambulated the fire, and while thinking of the lotus feet of her husband, entered its flames. So this is called Sahagamana, dying with the husband. Previously practiced in India from time immemorial, even after the British period it was rigidly observed, but soon became degraded, so that even if the wife was not strong enough to do it, relatives would force her and just, throw her into the fire. Hare Krishna. So the practice had to be stopped, although Prabhupada says sometimes it happens today. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, even after 1940, we personally knew of a chaste wife who died in this way. 23, after observing this brave act performed by the chaste wife Archie, the king of the great the wife of the great King Prithu. Many thousands of the wives of the demigods, along with their husbands, offered prayers to the queen, for they were very much satisfied. 24. At that time the demigods were situated on the top of Mandara hill, and all the wives and all their wives began to shower flowers on the funeral pyre, and began to talk amongst themselves as follows. We will continue with that tomorrow. Hare Krishna.